It's 10 o'clock. This is Sky News at 10, our top story. The controversial MasterChef host back on screen tonight after he apologises for attacking his critics as middle-class women of a certain age. We hear from a chef who says one crude comment left her in tears and that his constant sexual innuendos were heard by many members of staff.
There is no way that other people haven't been hearing these innuendos constantly throughout filming and throughout his time, and that it's been put down to lad culture, it's been put down to banter.
Also tonight, the Syrian government striking back against rebels who say they could advance because President Assad's traditional supporters were weakened or distracted. Protecting his family or setting a precedent. President Biden under fire after he pardoned the crimes of his own son. And restoring feeling and movement to paralysed limbs. The patients now walking despite catastrophic spinal injuries. Plus, we'll take a first look at tomorrow's front pages. That's in our press preview from 10:30 right through to midnight. Hello there, good evening. The host of the television show MasterChef may have stepped away from hosting the show while allegations that he made repeated sexual comments on set are investigated. But tonight, Gregg Wallace was back on air after the BBC said his show was about more than one individual. It followed an apology from the host for saying that his critics were middle-class women of a certain age, a comment Sir Keir Starmer's spokesman said was misogynistic. And the allegations against Gregg Wallace continue emerging. One guest judge from his show telling us today that she was left in tears by a crude sexual comment he'd made. A warning that Ashna Hurinag's report includes the crude language Gregg Wallace is alleged to have used.
That chutney needs to be perfectly balanced if it's just going to be the two items on the plate.
By 2018, Jackie Kearney was a regular guest judge on the BBC's MasterChef. After first appearing on the show in 2011, she had worked with Gregg Wallace on several occasions.
You've got 10 minutes, Nisha.
OK.
We doing well?
Memories that up until now Jackie has only shared with friends. One stands out the most after she had published her second book.
I was feeling really proud of it, and I wanted to give John and Greg a copy of my book. And John, as ever, was a complete gentleman. Greg was in the studio, and he was in the middle of the studio, in the middle of filming, actually having his makeup touched up. And there was crew everywhere, and he was mic'd up. I came into the studio and was like, "Oh, hi, Greg. I've got something for you." And he said, "Oh, is it a present for my cock?" And gave that whole sort of mansplay towards me. And I was so shocked. I actually stopped. I was walking across the studio and I stopped right in my tracks. And I felt like I wanted the ground to swallow me up.
Jackie says she felt embarrassed and humiliated, and that time and again his actions were excused.
There is no way that other people haven't been hearing these innuendos constantly throughout filming and throughout his time, and that it's been put down to lad culture, it's been put down to banter. But banter doesn't make somebody, if it's just banter and it's fun, then why am I crying in the toilets?
Allegations against the presenter have been mounting for days. His defiant dismissal that his accusers were middle-class women of a certain age have been fiercely criticised, with Downing Street labelling them misogynistic. It didn't take long for yet another social media video, though, this time with an apology.
I want to apologise for any offence that I caused with my post yesterday and any upset I may have caused to a lot of people. I wasn't in a good headspace when I posted it. I've been under a huge amount of stress, a lot of emotion. I felt very alone, under siege yesterday when I posted it. It's obvious to me I need to take some time out now while this investigation is underway.
Stepping back after stepping down, whilst the investigation being led by the makers of MasterChef gets underway. Fellow chef Tom Kerridge knows Wallace well, on and off air.
yes, I know Gregg, and yes, I've always known him to have lots of, he's always full of jokes and he's always full of charisma, and that front of camera charisma is always something that continues into off screen as well.
As the union representing those working in media and entertainment slams broadcasters for their internal reporting processes, Banijay UK, the production company behind MasterChef, say they are taking these allegations seriously and that welfare processes are regularly updated and strengthened with clear protocols to support both crew and contributors. Despite calls for the programme to be temporarily scrapped, the BBC decided to air it, saying the show is about more than one individual, but that person just so happens to be one of its most famous faces.
Chefs, you've had 1 hour. You've got 45 minutes left.
Well, Ashna is with me now. And Ashna, the question throughout this is how much the BBC knew about this alleged behaviour. And you do have some more information about that tonight.
That's right, Anna. We know that the BBC were made aware of complaints relating to Gregg Wallace at least 2 times, once in 2017 and another in 2018. They are reporting, the BBC, that one of those related to Times Radio host Asma Mir regarding her appearance on Celebrity MasterChef in 2017. It's understood she spoke to the production company, but then she later spoke to a senior member of BBC management staff, a lady called Kate Phillips, whose current title is the head of Unscripted Factual. Miss Phillips was told that the issue had been resolved, but a year later, she was reportedly alerted to a second occasion concerning Wallace's appearance on a different show, a show called Impossible Celebrities in 2018, a programme that's made by a different production company. The BBC report that this led to Miss Phillips sitting down with Mr Wallace for 90 minutes discussing his so-called unprofessional and so-called unacceptable behaviour. The corporation have told us that it would be wrong to report that the BBC has done nothing if or when matters had been raised with them. But of course, as you say, this does raise questions about who knew what when and whether bosses did enough at the time. It is why that the union that represents staff that work in the film and TV industry has said that it would be deeply troubling, the idea that there were internally investigated complaints during the 17 years that he worked there.
Ashna, thank you. Rebels advancing in Syria were able to surprise the forces of President Bashar al-Assad and take a major city because his main backers were distracted by their conflict with Israel, according to the main Syrian opposition group. A journalist working for Sky News saw the impact of the Syrian government's response to the advance today, the aftermath of airstrikes in a rebel-held province, which left, according to the UN, at least 44 civilians dead. A warning that our Middle East correspondent Alistair Bunkle's report includes pictures of some of the victims and those attacks right from the start.
Russian and Syrian fighter jets have been striking Aleppo and the surrounding countryside to slow the rebel advance. Idlib was also hit hard today. Streets were blown apart in a city already hollow from years of civil war. The fires still burnt as rescue workers hunted for survivors. But it was mostly dead bodies that they pulled from inside the collapsed buildings.
We're witnessing right now the most dangerous attacks, which is from the air warplanes attacking the northwest Syria, where we operate.
Syrian rebels are strengthening their hold on Aleppo despite Russian and Syrian attempts to push them back.
Allahu Akbar.
Videos filmed near Aleppo airport and posted on social media show fighters celebrating the capture of air defences. The opposition leader has said that his forces will press on unless the Syrian government agrees to negotiate.
The main goal of this military operation is to achieve peace and stability in Syria. But to achieve that, and as long as we see that the regime doesn't respond to the demands of the people, this military operation will continue.
Around 300 Iranian-backed militia from Iraq are said to have crossed into Syria to fight the rebels. And Iran's foreign minister was in Turkey today for talks on the developing situation.
The Islamic Republic of Iran announces its full support for the Syrian government, people and army. We will continue to stand beside the government, people and army of Syria as we did before.
Syria is a country torn apart and divided many ways, but President Assad still has a strong support base. Many Syrians see him as the least worst option. This rebel offensive is the largest threat to his power for a long time, though. But he has refused to negotiate in the past and looks to be digging his heels in again and fighting back. Alistair Bunkle, Sky News in Jerusalem.
President Assad will be hoping that his fight back against the rebels is helped by his traditional allies, Russia, Iran and Lebanon's Hezbollah. All three, though, of course, have been either weakened by war or at least distracted. Our international correspondent, John Sparks, has this assessment of the situation on the ground.
Over the past 6 days, Syrian rebels have changed the contours of a conflict that hadn't moved in years, revealing in an instant the weakness of Bashar al-Assad's regime. A coalition of rebel groups are now on the offensive. We've marked them in green. Government-controlled areas, we've marked them in red. Starting from a pocket under their control called Idlib, the rebels are moving out. They've captured the country's second-largest city, Aleppo, and they are moving south towards the city of Hama. That's significant. Hama, on the main highway leading to the capital, Damascus. The rebels also attacking Kurdish groups, seen here in yellow. The Kurds now trying to evacuate a city called Tel Rifat that is completely surrounded now by rebel groups. The rebels are led by Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, also known as HTS, a proscribed terrorist group. They broke from al-Qaeda in 2017, but they retain ideological links, and they're highly motivated. They're also well-equipped.
Groups like HTS have spent the last several years preparing for this offensive. They've been training their forces. They're extremely well equipped. They have tanks. They have armoured personnel carriers, entire fleets of them. They're armed with anti-tank guided missiles, air defence systems. So this is a force that has spent years preparing for this. And we're just starting to see the consequences of that preparation.
The civil war began 13 years ago when anti-government protests were crushed by Assad's forces. Moderates were sidelined or killed. Foreign fighters and foreign countries were drawn in. Ultimately, Assad's survival has been underwritten by some of these foreign actors, like the Russians with an air base here in Latakia. They've also got a naval base on the coast. They've been heavily involved. Their air force accused of razing entire civilian districts. Then there's Iran providing troops and training and the support of some of its proxies like Hezbollah, based in Lebanon, also militia groups based in Iraq. Several of these militias now deploying fighters to try and prop Assad up. But the world has changed. Assad's allies have been weakened or distracted by other conflicts. Hezbollah badly mauled after its 13-month war with Israel, for example. And Assad's got another problem. Syria is poor, the government corrupt, the population oppressed by his own regime, young men forcibly conscripted into the army. Internal collapse may represent a greater threat than 30,000 rebel troops moving southwards.
John Sparks there. Well, across the border from Syria, in Lebanon, there are warning signs that the ceasefire between Israel and Hezbollah could collapse, with both sides accusing the other of breaching the terms of the deal and an increase in military activity. Well, our correspondent Tom Cheshire is live in Beirut for us tonight. So, Tom, what are we seeing and hearing there then?
What we've been hearing is drones over Beirut, and that was a commonplace of this conflict until very recently when that ceasefire was signed. Also reports of casualties in the south of the country. This ceasefire is looking very, very brittle indeed. That's not to say it's been quiet all the time. There have been multiple accusations by both sides of violation. I think it's fair to say the preponderance of those have been of Israeli airstrikes and of Israeli shredding scores of violations, according not just to the Lebanese government and Hezbollah, but also to France. But what hadn't happened in the meantime was Hezbollah firing back. That has changed. Hezbollah said today that it had shelled an Israeli position in disputed territory. There are no casualties reported. As a result of that, though, the IDF said this was a grave violation and that it had struck Hezbollah throughout Lebanon, hitting multiple locations. As a result of that, there have been 9 deaths reported in the south of the country. So there is a worrying sign indeed. The main ceasefire, though, the Pentagon today is saying that it does appear to be holding. And that's interesting in terms of what both sides have been saying. When it comes to Hezbollah, they said what they did today was a defensive warning. And when it comes to Israel, they said they remain obligated to the fulfillment of the conditions of the ceasefire. So the ante has been taken up, but the ceasefire is technically still holding. The problem is if this tit-for-tat exchange keeps on developing, then that would break the ceasefire. The US has a crucial role to play here, but it is a tense night ahead, a tense day ahead for Lebanon.
In Beirut there, thank you. Sir Keir Starmer has given the strongest hint yet that he expects there to be a negotiated peace between Ukraine and Russia. The Prime Minister was giving the annual foreign policy speech at the Lord Mayor's banquet in central London, where he set out what Ukraine's allies need to do ahead of any potential peace talks with President Putin.
We must continue to back Ukraine and do what it takes to support their self-defence for as long as it takes, to put Ukraine in the strongest possible position for negotiations so that they can secure a just and lasting peace on their terms that guarantees their security, independence, and the right to choose their future.
President Biden has tarnished his reputation and made a decision that could be abused by future presidents, said politicians inside his own party today. They were reacting to Joe Biden's decision to pardon his son, Hunter, over crimes relating to gun ownership and tax evasion. Our US correspondent, James Matthews, has more.
The diary of a departing president has taken him on a business trip to Angola. But for Joe Biden, all the questions are about the business back home.
Happy Thanksgiving.
After a family Thanksgiving weekend, Biden Sr. has done for his son what he said he wouldn't: issue a pardon for offences that had him facing jail. There was the possession of this gun illegally because he didn't declare his drug use. And then it was Hunter Biden's tax evasion that he admitted in California. The president issued a statement that read, "Hunter was singled out only because he's my son, and that is wrong. In trying to break Hunter, they've tried to break me, and there's no reason to believe it will stop here. Enough is enough. I hope Americans will understand why a father and a president would come to this decision." The executive grant of clemency by the father was endorsed by the mother at a White House Christmas event.
I said I'd abide by the jury decision. I will do that, and I will not pardon him.
Biden's White House had repeatedly said there would be no pardon.
I could speak for the president, and he said he would not pardon his son. We've been asked that question multiple times. Our answer stands, which is no.
The same spokesperson was asked about the value of these promises on the president's plane to Africa.
He said he wrestled with this, and because he believes in the justice system, but he also believes that the war politics infected the process and led to a miscarriage of justice.
The pledge of no pardon was made through months of prosecuting Donald Trump. He's called it such an abuse and miscarriage of justice. Republican Speaker Mike Johnson wrote, "Trust in our justice system has been almost irreparably damaged by the Bidens and their use and abuse of it." And Democratic Governor of Colorado, Jared Polis, wrote, "I'm disappointed that he put his family ahead of the country. This is a bad precedent that could be abused by later presidents." Politically, Hunter Biden was a rebuttal to Trump's claim that he was the victim of a justice system weaponized to get him. The prosecution of a president's son was seen as an example of justice for all, equally. It is the latest episode in the Hunter Biden story, who's long faced scrutiny. His much talked about laptop laid bare evidence from the drug addict years, if not the crimes that caught up with him in court. It is a son's sorry tale that forms part of his father's legacy. The latest rewrite doesn't necessarily read well. James Matthews, Sky News in Washington.
170 children and teenagers under the age of 18 have been killed in the occupied West Bank since the October the 7th attacks, say human rights groups. The Israel Defense Forces say what they referred to as minors often participate in violent disturbances. Sky News has spoken to the families of two boys. One, Rayan, was shot dead close to his family's home. The second, 9-year-old Karim, is now paralysed from the waist down. A warning that this report from the West Bank by our international affairs correspondent Dominic Waghorn includes images of one of the children being treated for his wounds.
9-year-old Karim needs hours of physiotherapy a week, painful but necessary, after he was shot by Israeli soldiers. His father, Shadi, showed us where the bullet entered his son's neck and left his body through his spine, leaving him paralysed from the waist down. This was the night Israelis shot Karim, ambulance paramedics fighting to save him. 11 months on, his father says the video is still hard to watch.
The first time I saw this, I ran to the bathroom to cry. I couldn't bear it. Can't handle it. It's too much for me.
This picture was taken shortly after the shooting last December. When Israeli troops entered Karim's village in the occupied West Bank, he'd been on the way to the shop, say his family. Then they opened fire. His grandfather, who carried the wounded Karim to the ambulance, says the army had no reason to shoot him.
There was nothing going on then, no clashes, nothing. Karim was just playing on the road. His mum had asked him to pick something up from the supermarket. Out of nowhere, the sound of gunfire and the voice of children screaming out that Karim had been injured.
We went to Jenin to find a family mourning one of Israel's latest child victims. The parents of 14-year-old Rayan al-Sayed told us of their loss.
I miss him every hour. I haven't slept in 2 days. Every night I feel him. He comes home to me and says, "Mum, I'm here. Mum, I can see you." When I pray, I see him in front of me, smiling. Bless him.
Israelis say Rayan had been among a group of terrorists throwing explosives at soldiers and firing on them, claims rejected by eyewitnesses and his family. Rayan's uncle took us to the place where he was shot in October. Soldiers opened fire on the teenager, this man told us, from an armoured vehicle just 20 metres away. He fell to the ground, shot in the neck and chest. This video of him being carried away does not show anyone bearing weapons. These are the faces of the 170 children killed by Israel since October the 7th in the occupied West Bank, according to NGOs Save the Children and DCI Palestine. 70 of them were aged 15 or younger, 4 were below the age of 9. 135 were reportedly shot dead. The rest were killed by drone, warplane or artillery attacks. At least 1,400 more are thought to have been wounded by the Israeli military. In a statement, the Israel Defense Forces told Sky News Palestinian minors often participate in violent disturbances and hostile activities against security forces and Israeli citizens. In addition, terrorist organisations operate and embed themselves within the civilian population, using civilians as human shields. Every case in which a minor or civilian is killed is thoroughly investigated, says the IDF. Israelis say that includes the case of 14-year-old Rayan in Jenin, and the shooting that paralysed 9-year-old Karim is still under investigation 11 months after it happened. His family wanted us to see this video of him in happier times, playing with his brother and sister, before the Israelis shot him and put him in a wheelchair for the rest of his life. One of hundreds of families across the West Bank whose lives have been shattered by Israelis shooting their children. Dominic Waghorn, Sky News in the West Bank.
Now, there are a similar number of Qataris living in their home country to the number of people who live in Coventry. But for such a small population, their government packs a big punch, central to negotiations over global issues like the war in Gaza. The Emir of Qatar arrived in the UK today for a state visit. And the question is whether the pragmatism of talks over trade and investment or criticism over human rights will be at the centre of the conversation. Our royal correspondent, Rhiannon Mills, has this.
A state visit for Qatar, the ultimate diplomatic gift the UK can give.
Just a short drive from Buckingham Palace and you'll see where Qatari money's been spent. Hotels like the Savoy, and one you can't miss, the Shard. Of course, the eye-catching thing on Tuesday will always be the ceremonial, so the carriages, the state banquet. But the really important part of state visits are the conversations we don't get to see, the private chats about things like future investment. And that won't be the only topic that's up for discussion. The World Cup saw Qatar's treatment of workers and human rights record heavily criticised. Now, 2 years later, they're being lauded globally for their role in negotiations between Russia and Ukraine and the release of hostages from Gaza.
There's been a major conflagration there pretty reliably every 10 or 15 years for as long as we can remember. So if we have these important allies in the region, we can work with them upstream, as it were, develop capacities there to maybe, I don't know, stave off that instability.
But leading human rights groups have concerns. Amnesty International told us it's important that Qatar's poor human rights record isn't overlooked. The few who dare to criticise the government face arrest and possible jail sentences. With Human Rights Watch adding, hosting the royal visit without addressing these issues is tantamount to royal washing Qatar's troubling rights record. Peter Tatchell was detained in Doha when he protested ahead of the World Cup.
I'm profoundly shocked that the Labour government, which is supposed to be about human rights, is prepared to cozy up to a dictatorship for the sake of money. You know, investment's important, but not at any price.
The International Media Office for Qatar told Sky News this is a historic, decades-long partnership that spans diverse fields, including diplomacy, defence, humanitarian aid, energy security, trade and investment. Over the past decade, we have consulted and coordinated extensively with global partners, including the ILO, trade unions, NGOs and the UK government, to implement a modernised, fair and effective labour system in line with the highest international standards. A full military welcome was awaiting the Emir and his wife and the media, boosting the global recognition the UK government believes that Qatar deserves. Rhiannon Mills, Sky News at Buckingham Palace.
It is, says one previously paralysed patient, a dream come true. The new medical technique, which has allowed him to walk short distances and even climb stairs following revolutionary brain surgery. The patients had been wheelchair-bound after suffering severe spinal injuries. Our science and medical correspondent Thomas Moore has this report.
Wolfgang is wide awake as surgeons carefully drill through his skull and then insert electrodes into his brain. It's the only way of knowing they've reached the right place. He's been paralysed below the waist since a skiing accident in 2006. Unable to move his legs, he shuffles downstairs on his bottom and uses a wheelchair. But when the electrodes are switched on, there is a remarkable transformation. Signals from the brain are able to pass through the damage in his spinal cord and help him walk.
If I want, I can a little bit walk or go to the steps upstairs and downstairs. And if I need something in the kitchen where I have to stand up, I can do it. In future, I think we don't need a wheelchair again. It's a long way, but I think the dream comes true.
Research using artificial intelligence found that a part of the brain called the lateral hypothalamus, previously thought to control arousal and motivation, also had a role in walking. Surgeons inserted electrodes to stimulate neurons in the region with tiny electrical impulses. This reactivated nerve fibres in the spinal cord that hadn't been damaged by the accident, allowing the brain to regain some control of the leg muscles.
Our interpretation is that this small region is actually talking to all the key regions of the brain that can regain access to the spinal cord. So it's some kind of amplificator of the intention to walk.
The technique was tested in rats and mice, but 2 human patients have had surgery now, and even while they were still on the operating table, there were hopeful signs.
When you switch on the stimulator, the patient says, "I feel my legs." So this was, of course, a kind of relief. And she said, I feel the urge to walk.
The other patient, who hasn't been named, could only walk with a harness before the operation. Now she can support herself. It's early days for the technology, but it's already helping patients who were told they would never walk again. Thomas Moore, Sky News.
Well, that was Sky News at 10. Coming up, we'll take a first look at tomorrow's newspapers in the press preview tonight, joined by the chief political correspondent of The Sun, Jack Elsom, and the journalist and broadcaster, Jenny Kleeman. Welcome to both of you. Among the stories we will be discussing, this on the front of the Telegraph. Its headline for tomorrow's paper, I will not side with Trump over Europe, quoting Sir Keir Starmer there. More on that and other stories, of course, in just a moment.
We've got your Sunday mornings covered. From the front page and the sounds of the streets to the voices of the people who make the major calls and big picture politics beyond Westminster. We'll put you at the heart of our story. A new start to Sunday.
I'm ready. Are you?
Join me, Trevor Phillips, Sunday mornings on Sky News.
Well, this is Sky News. In just a moment, the press preview, a first look at what is on the front pages. First, though, a reminder of our top stories this evening. A former MasterChef contestant has told Sky News she was left in tears following lewd sexual comments made by Gregg Wallace, as the BBC confirmed it will continue to air episodes of the show featuring the presenter. Syrian rebels say they have been able to make advances against President Bashar al-Assad because his allies have been too distracted by Israel's conflicts in Gaza and Lebanon. And critics within his own party have accused President Joe Biden of tarnishing his reputation by deciding to issue a pardon for his son, Hunter. Well, hello there. You're watching the press preview, a first look at what is on the front pages. Time then to see what's making the headlines with the chief political correspondent of The Sun, Jack Elsom, and the journalist and broadcaster, Jenny Kleeman. Welcome and great to see both of you. So as ever, let's take a look at the front pages, starting with The Telegraph. It leads with tonight's foreign policy speech by the Prime Minister, with the headline, Starmer, I will not side with Trump over Europe. The Times, though, says he still wants stronger ties with the US after Donald Trump moves into the White House again. MasterChef host Gregg Wallace's apology to anyone who may have upset by his latest remarks about the people who've been complaining about his behaviour leads the Daily Express. The Mirror puts it very simply, I'm sorry, while The Sun says the saga is reaching boiling point with growing calls for the show to be axed. Meanwhile, government by talking shop is the headline for the Daily Mail, which says that Labour has set up 67 review bodies, task forces and consultations since coming to power instead of actual policies, the paper suggests. The Metro leads with news of a law change on stalkers, with victims to get better protection and the right to know the identity of their tormentor, even when they're online. Financial Times says the head of NATO has warned Donald Trump of a dire threat to the US from China, Iran and North Korea if he allows a peace deal in Ukraine that is favourable to Moscow. In a similar vein, The Guardian has a warning from the new UK head of cybersecurity that we are underestimating the online threat from hostile states. And after 541 years, the Star says there's finally firm evidence that Richard III was responsible for the infamous murders of two young princes, his nephews, in the Tower of London. We're reminded by scanning the QR code you'll see on screen during the programme, you can check out the front pages of tomorrow's newspapers while you listen to our guests. So let's head then to Jack and to Jenny. Jack and Jenny, I like that. Why did that tick both of us? Jenny's looking at us going, who are these people? Anyway, let's go to The Sun. It's your paper, Jack. You could kick off. Boiling point, you suggest, over the Gregg Wallace affair.
Yeah, this row really has reached boiling point. It's been bubbling now for a few days. Finally, someone has told Gregg Wallace that when you're in a hole, you just stop digging. And so he's come out today and he's finally apologised for that pretty bizarre statement which he gave yesterday, which he said that middle-class women of a certain age were the only ones making these allegations against him. That is going to live on, that phrase, I think, in infamy forever. It's almost become a meme now on social media. But listen, he's apologised, which you have to give him credit for that. But now, as usual, the attention is turning to the actions of the BBC. And so they have defied calls by MPs, former ministers, campaigners today to pull MasterChef off air and any other shows which Gregg Wallace is featuring in. You know, he's, I think, in 8 shows in the next 13 days airing on the BBC. And a lot of people are going to think it's quite frankly a bit weird that he's currently being investigated by the corporation and the production company, but they're still seeing him on screens with no kind of disclaimer about the behaviour which he's alleged to have done. And so the BBC tonight holding firm, saying that their shows are more than just one man himself, but some viewers looking at this are going to find it, quite frankly, a bit odd.
Yeah, and the contestants, the BBC is suggesting, you know, have worked really hard to get where they are and, you know, want to see it through. It's inside the papers. Our BBC's in hot water. Outrageous MasterChef host Gregg stays on, your paper says. I don't know if you've got the inside pages. We have had a statement from BBC tonight, or a BBC source. While we're not going to comment on individuals or any internal HR processes, particularly when there is an ongoing process in place being run by Banerjee, who have the direct contractual relationship with Gregg Wallace, it would be wrong to report the BBC has done nothing if or when matters have been raised with us, not least because it is already being widely reported there were interventions in both 2017 and 2018 where action was taken. Those two incidents relate to Asma Mir, who complained to Kate Phillips over Wallace's behaviour on Mastermind. Kate Phillips was assured that the issue had been addressed. And after another complaint generated by Wallace's appearances on Impossible Celebrities in 2018, he was spoken to by Kate Phillips for 90 minutes about why his behaviour was unacceptable and unprofessional. And I think many people had asked, why didn't someone just tell him to not speak like this? And here is evidence that the BBC had, they say. Whether they said it enough is, I suppose, part of the question here, isn't it?
I think this is a difficult one for the BBC because the allegations being levelled against Gregg Wallace are not Jimmy Savile-level allegations. It's not that he physically abused anyone, sexually abused anyone. The allegations are that he was basically sexually harassing people, or rather that he was making coarse jokes, doing some things where he was running around naked with his modesty covered with a sock, and various other things that he clearly thought were funny that other people didn't. And he's in a work environment. I mean, I have been on a production team when I've been quite young with big stars. If you're a freelancer working in this environment and the star does something like that, you don't say, oh, I don't find that funny. There would be a culture around him of people who wouldn't say, I don't find it funny. It's difficult for the BBC because they didn't make this programme. It's made by an independent production company. He was spoken to by people from the BBC. There are people within the media who are desperate to attack the BBC and turn this into a Hugh Edwards story, a Jimmy Savile story, which it is not. I mean, there are many people baying for blood for the BBC. However, the question is he bigger than the format? The BBC would suggest that MasterChef is a format that should be able to go out regardless of who is presenting it. It's been, Lloyd Grossman used to present it years and years ago in another guise. There are people, as you say, who have been contestants who want their participation to be broadcast. They're gambling that it is. Other people would say it is painful for those who have made these allegations to see him being broadcast regardless of these allegations being investigated. This apology that he made today is such a non-apology. It's an apology for offence caused, and it's an apology that is dripping with self-pity. I'm sorry I said that thing about middle-class women of a certain age. I was going through a terrible time. It was a horrible day for me on Sunday. Just completely ridiculous. His lack of self-awareness, his lack of humility, his lack of intelligence is palpable. I think it would be quite difficult for him to continue in his career going forward. That is a separate question of whether or not these episodes that have been filmed should not be broadcast. And I think it is not an easy one for the BBC. It's not an easy line for the BBC to be walking at the moment because there are good arguments on either side.
And more broadly, I mean, is it obtuse to see this as, offensive comments versus free speech? And, a sense that the world has moved on past this behaviour when some people have not moved on with it. Is there any excuse for any of it? Is sort of what
It's
I'm
always
asking.
that fine line, isn't it? And I think that many people would see themselves as a cheeky chappy and have a banter in the workplace and maybe get on the boundaries of being boisterous. But I think Jenny makes the very valid point that if you are the star of a show and you're making it to people who are either contestants or producers or staff, then they can't really answer back, no matter how uncomfortable they feel about it. And so I think if you're going to have that and you've got a very good working relationship with that person and you know that they might not find that offensive, then there's an argument that it is just banter. But I think that if you're saying it to contestants who are almost in your world and in your sphere and you hold that sort of power dynamic over them, then I don't think you should be really straying the line because they're sort of fighting with one hand behind their back. They can't really answer back to you.
Yeah, any final thoughts? So we've got lots of other stories.
It's just that it's a workplace, and this is the whole thing. That comments like this, he's alleged to have been running around naked with a sock covering his genitals. Yeah. He's been alleged to have done that, and the idea that this is something that only middle-class women of a certain age would find offensive is offensive to working-class women who probably, the idea that they're going to find that absolutely hilarious when they're trying to do their jobs. I don't think anybody finds that hilarious necessarily. It's sad, and it shouldn't be happening where people are working.
Yeah, well, clearly an ongoing process now to look into all of this. In the meantime, let's go to the Daily Telegraph, shall we? Keir Starmer speaking, the big foreign policy moment for him, obviously, at the Lord Mayor's banquet. And this is interesting. A few interesting things came out of it. One of which is this headline, "I will not side with Trump over Europe," talking about how, the wars of tomorrow are being fought today, as in, Ukraine and so on. So the positioning of this is interesting when there feels like the Starmer-Trump relationship itself might be awkward anyway.
Yeah, it's always been a tricky position from the UK because we usually have a special relationship with the United States historically, but also geographically we're part of Europe. And in the past, we've done quite a good job at actually playing both sides and carving a pretty good position where we get the benefits of both. The Trump presidency seems to have changed that in regards to what he has said about Europe, whether he sparks a trade war with Europe. Do we sort of try and wiggle out of those tariffs and side with the Americans, or do we sort of go with the Europeans and maybe put some retaliatory tariffs on? He's made pretty defensive comments about NATO in the past and the idea of how European powers need to step up. And so the narrative since Trump got in has very much been framed as who do we pick? Do we sort of put in our lot with the Americans, or do we sort of hedge our bets with Europe? Starmer is saying tonight at this speech at the Lord Mayor's banquet, he doesn't believe we need to do either. We can sort of continue playing both sides and get the best of both worlds. Whether or not that will be feasible in a Trump presidency. One of his advisors, Stephen Moore, has previously said that we need to turn our backs on the socialist model, which is enveloping Europe. But time will tell, and this is definitely Starmer's sort of version of cakeism. We'll need to have it and eat it.
And sort of the backdrop to it, Elon Musk criticising Labour policies on X perpetually, a fraughtness in the relationship there as well. But, does this feel significant, do you think? And is it part of a concerted attempt, actually, to support Ukraine right now?
Well, I think what feels significant is his statement that a negotiated settlement is inevitable in Ukraine. That is significant because, obviously, since the invasion in 2022, there has always been, for the British side, has always been that, Ukraine should never cede any territory. And we know that, it is very likely that Trump's entire strategy is going to be that a negotiated settlement will involve Ukraine giving up territory there. So, yes, that is significant. But again, Keir Starmer is very good at trying to appear to be all things to all people. I'll make it work without there being any problem for anybody. And that's what's happening here. And, he's invoking Attlee and Churchill and saying, that we don't have to choose. But we all know that in his stomach, he is going to find it unbearable to be negotiating with Trump and being buddy-buddy with Trump. That they are two people who otherwise would never meet. But, he's quite good at staying in the middle of the middle of the middle, isn't he?
And just very, very quickly as well, there we go, PM, I'll channel it in... OK, sorry, it made me laugh as well. Anyway, very quickly, I wanted to do this story here, which is our nearest neighbour. Politics there crumbling again, it seems, with Michel Barnier.
Yeah, and if you think that British politics over the past few years has been a complete rollercoaster, then across the Channel as well, it's also pretty fraught. Barnier, with some sort of parliamentary chicanery, the new French PM, has forced through a pretty controversial budget, £60 billion worth of cuts. Doing this, he has upset the very fragile coalition which he has built between the far left of the party, also appeasing Marine Le Pen's far right. They have now put a motion of no confidence in his government, which I think is going to have come to a head next week. We could see Macron's Barnier administration teeter on collapse.
Watch this space. OK, stay there, both of you. Lots more still to come, including this on the front of the Times. Their headline, Trump threatens to release rioters after Biden pardons his son. Back with that in just a second.
Welcome to the world.
Our new podcast, starting now. It's very exciting. Every week, we'll be reporting from the world's trouble spots.
We get to hold those in positions of power accountable, and we get to ask the questions that the audience, the listeners, want to know about.
And that's why it is so important that people tune in, come along for the road, come along for the journey. It'll be fun.
I saw police being forceful, pushing young men and women to the ground as they made almost 100 arrests. Will the cold affect to your voters?
Well, we have a lot of tremendous support.
Free, wherever you get your news. The people here know that worse storms may well be on their way. I'm Martha Kellner and I'm Sky's US correspondent based here in Los Angeles.
Our app gives you the very best of Sky News wherever you are. Breaking news, videos and analysis.
Evidence of the crisis.
Podcasts, watching us live.
Live here from Washington.
Wherever you get your podcast.
All in one place. And all at just the touch of a screen. The Sky News app. Get the full story first.
Weeknights on Sky News.
This is your chance. Tell people. Welcome to the Politics Hub.
Our police force has apologised. If you want to find out about Grimsby, you come to the docks.
I'm live in Jerusalem.
Are you not concerned that that could lead to all-out war?
Hello there, good evening. There are fears of an upsurge in violence. What's at stake here?
You are watching the press preview, a first look at the front pages as they arrive.
Jubilation in the streets, while some emotional.
This is a political victory for Prime Minister Modi and his Hindu Nationalist Party. I'm Neville Lazarus and I'm Sky's reporter based in Delhi. Companies like these are helping India in its trajectory to be a serious player in space exploration. Sky News, get the full story first.
Play Sky News.
From the Sky News Centre at 7.
Now that you're up to date, we can go into a bit more detail.
Things can change incredibly quickly.
Taken by surprise.
Have you ever known a moment like this in British politics before? Yes. Cheers.
We'll start with breaking news.
Let's get the latest on the ground.
So, by the end, we'll hopefully all understand what's going on in the world just that little better.
Day of this conflict.
They keep telling us that they want aid.
And this is what's left of it.
Tanks, heavy vehicle.
Why only in America? People want their country to work.
You want a job in a normal life.
Why are these homes empty?
I want you to be honest with people.
That has happened within minutes.
Sky News, the full story first. Free wherever you get your news.
Well, welcome back. You are watching the press preview with me once again, the chief political correspondent of The Sun, Jack Elsom, and journalist and broadcaster Jenny Kleeman. Welcome back to both of you. Jenny, let's talk about the pardon of Hunter Biden by the US President Joe Biden and the implications for what will happen when Donald Trump comes in, including for those who were convicted of rioting on January the 6th, for example.
Well, despite having made so many assurances that he was not going to pardon his son, who was found guilty of tax evasion and purchasing a gun when he shouldn't have been purchasing a gun, one of those charges could lead to a prison term. Despite saying he was not going to pardon his son, Joe Biden has come back from his Thanksgiving weekend away and said he's going to pardon his son, and also pardon his son in such a way that his son cannot be found guilty of any crime over the past 10 years, no matter what it might be. And I just think this is a complete disgrace. It shows perhaps what everyone suspected when they knew that Joe Biden was not prepared to stand down for all those months where he was clearly incapable of fighting for the presidency and yet was not standing down, which is that he has put his self-interest before principle, before what matters.
But his justification was it's a weaponisation of the justice process, which is entirely what Donald Trump said about all the court cases that he faced as well.
It's that, and it's also that the thinking is that in the Trump administration there is going to be a rabid attorney general that will be out for blood and that Hunter Biden will not be able to face any kind of proportionate justice. The issue with this is, once you start doing this, people lose faith entirely in politics and politicians who seem to be completely out for themselves. And second of all, you cannot complain when Donald Trump goes on to say, as everyone suspects he will, that he's going to pardon the January the 6th rioters. The Democrats will have no leg to stand on. And I just think it's terrible.
OK, I'm going to move on if you don't mind. I'm sure you want to come in there because we need to move on. I'm just wondering if we can squeeze in the no hiding place for stalkers, which is in the Metro, just quickly. And inspired by Coronation Street style, the paper says, this new law change.
Yeah, it's a fantastic campaign, actually. I'm trying to get the front page up. There we go. Thanks very much. It's actually a campaign spearheaded by Nicola Thorpe, who I know. I've spoken to her tonight, and she's delighted to be on the front page. And why wouldn't she? It's a fantastic campaign which she has run out of a pretty horrific personal experience she went through. So the new law change, which is going to come in, Yvette Cooper's going to announce it tomorrow, is that stalking victims are going to have a right to know who their tormentors are online if they are anonymous. A lot of people are victims of stalking by anonymous people. I think that Nicola was stalked by someone called Grim Reaper for quite a long period of time, and you don't actually find out their identity until you appear in court. So even if they have a restraining order on you, you've no idea who they are. They could be speaking to you at a bus stop. You might think they're a pleasant man, but actually they've been your stalker for a long time. And so this is going to give victims much greater access and the knowledge of who their tormentors could be. And I think it's a quite welcome change.
And just time to show the double-page spread in the Times of the turning on of the Downing Street Christmas lights today. This comes ahead of the non-reset reset thingy that comes on later this week. What's its official title?
It's called The Plan for Change, and it is definitely not a relaunch.
OK, great. We'll talk about that later, I think, won't we? Both of you, thank you very much indeed. Jack and Jenny, see you next hour. Thank you. So let's take a look, shall we, at the weather now. Northern parts will see rain spreading from the west tomorrow, bringing a spell of snow to northern mountains and ushering in milder conditions. There will be a mostly fine, dry but frosty start, -10 Celsius possible over sheltered parts of northern Scotland. Southwest of Ireland will be milder and cloudy with a little patchy rain. The UK staying mostly fine through the morning. The southwest, though, will cloud over. Ireland, meanwhile, will see murky low cloud and a few drizzly outbreaks spreading from the south. It'll be mild there, chilly elsewhere. Scotland, Northern Ireland and the north of Ireland will turn wet and windy during the afternoon. Ireland and Northern Ireland, though, mostly drying up later, and spells of snow on northern hills. Well, our press preview continues in Sky News at 11. We'll hear from a former MasterChef contestant who has told Sky News how she was reduced to tears by presenter Gregg Wallace.